Now please give rise to bodhicitta thinking. I will establish all limitless mother sentient beings at the level of perfect enlightenment. To that end, I will listen to this profound teaching and put it into practice. So the Dharma that we speak of today is a torch lighting the way to freedom, complete instructions on the preliminary practices of the profound and secret heart essence of the Dakini, comprised of virtuous beginning, middle, and end. Having covered the virtuous beginning, we're currently looking at the virtuous middle, the main body of the text, which is comprised of two main parts: how to follow a spiritual friend, the route of the path, and part 2, the main explanation of the stages for setting out on the path. Having covered the first, we're currently looking at the second, the main explanation of the stages for setting out on the path. And this explanation is comprised of two further sections: the general preliminary practice and the specific preliminary practice for the yogas of the two phases. The first, the general preliminary practice, is comprised of, first of all, an explanation of the general preliminaries for each session which make one a fit vessel. And then secondly, the common preliminaries that cultivate the feet of one's mind stream with the four practices for turning the mind. So we're currently looking at this second subsection of the reflection on the four mind changings. From among the four mind changes, we have covered the first two: the reflection on the difficulty of finding the freedoms and advantages, and the reflection on death and impermanence. And now we're looking at the reflection on the defects of cyclic existence, which is comprised of three main parts: reflecting generally on the sufferings of cyclic existence, reflecting specifically on the sufferings of the 6 classes of beings, and reflecting particularly on the nature of the 3 kinds of suffering. So today we continue looking at the suffering of the 6 classes of beings, which is itself is presented by means of 2 parts: reflecting on the sufferings of the 3 lower realms, and reflecting on the sufferings of the higher realms. So from among these 2, the reflecting on the sufferings of the 3 lower realms and the higher realms, we're currently looking at the lower realms, and from among the reflection on the sufferings of the hell realms, the hungry spirits, and the animals. We have covered the reflection on the sufferings of the hells. We reached the end of that, and now we come to the reflection on the sufferings of the hungry spirits. So page 105 in the English translation. What does the word "a hungry spirit" actually mean? It means one who is plagued by a desire for food and drink, one whose mind is filled with nothing else but the thought, the craving for food and drink, because of such intense hunger and thirst, night and day, at all points, at all times. All one can think about is one's longing for food and drink. And so the Tibetan word has this connotation of one's mind being plagued or tormented by this craving. And there are many different types of hungry spirits, or we could say pretas. What is the cause for being reborn as a hungry spirit? It's mainly stinginess, miserliness. That's the main cause for being reborn as a hungry spirit, sorry. That's the cause, and the result is the suffering of hungry spirits. So those of us who are bound by miserliness, by stinginess, and live our lives in that way, then we are cultivating the cause for being reborn as hungry spirit in the future. So that is the ultimate result, will be the final result of stinginess, being reborn in the three realms, specifically in the as a hungry spirit. So stinginess about what? With regards to what? With regards to one's possessions, one's wealth, one's assets. So getting so caught up in attachment that one becomes very stingy with these things. One cannot bear to part with them, cannot bear to give them away, cannot bear to be generous. This is the cause for rebirth as a hungry spirit. So today, it being the Parinirvana anniversary of Kyabje Jushin Rinpoche, I'll be teaching just for one session this morning, and then we will begin the commemoration puja for Kyabje Rinpoche. There's stories we could tell. These stories we could tell about people in the past who were reborn as hungry spirits because of their miserliness. We don't really have time to go through these now, though. So the hungry spirits mostly live more than 500 leagues beneath our world. So we talk about the hungry spirits as living in a specific place, a location, then that is where they live. 500 leagues. League is a specific measure of time. Could say approximately it equals a kilometer or more. So very deep below the earth. There are some, however, who are scattered. So scattered on the earth, living on the earth, or distributed throughout the earth, mountains and rivers. The Close Mindfulness Sutra mentions 36 kinds of hungry spirits, but these can be condensed into 3 categories. Hungry spirits with external obscurations, those with internal obscurations, and those with obscurations related to food and drink. But if we go into it in more detail, we can actually talk of 36 kinds of hungry spirits, as mentioned by Buddha himself in the Close Mindfulness Sutra. So I don't remember all those 36 types right now, although I have read through the Kangyo and read through it once from beginning to end, very slowly and carefully. So anyway, in short, we can talk of 3 types of hungry spirits. The first are those who suffer from external obscurations. These hungry spirits are afflicted by hunger and thirst. So generally speaking, those who are wealthy suffer from all the strife involved in accumulating wealth and the anxiety about losing their wealth. Those who are poor suffer from not having wealth to begin with. These hungry spirits are afflicted by hunger and thirst. They therefore have dried up, emaciated mouths and bodies, scrawny necks and limbs and shaggy hair. So we can see beings who are like hungry spirits, who seem to have the bodies of hungry spirits in countries afflicted by famine, countries like Somalia. They're emaciated with scrawny necks and limbs, swollen bellies and so on. They run everywhere looking for something to eat and drink, but they never find anything. Even if they see far in the distance piles of food, rivers or orchards laden with fruit, as soon as they reach them, they see the food vanish without trace, and so on. There's a story in The Words of My Perfect Teacher about hungry ghosts. So it was Arya Katayana who saw this happen. So most of you are probably, lay students and monastics alike, are probably very familiar with The Words of My Perfect Teacher and all of its story. But for those of you who might not be familiar, who might be new, then I'll tell this story quickly, with the hope that by hearing this story, you'll be freed somewhat from stinginess. Your stinginess will loosen up a bit, and to be able to make meaningful use of your wealth by making offerings to the 3 jewels, giving generously to those in need, and sowing the seeds for positive rebirth and liberation in future lives. These are the point of telling these stories and thinking about these stories, things, right? As explained in The Words of My Perfect Teacher. So Katayana travelled, this noble being Katayana travelled to the hungry spirit realm, and there he met a hungry spirit mother who was in a state of utter anguish. As a result of her karma, she had given birth to 500 children, 500 hungry spirit children. They were all on the verge of death from starvation. So it was because of her karma that she'd given birth to this many children. No matter how far and wide she searched, she could never find food to feed them, and so they were all on the verge of death from starvation. Katayana encountered this distressed mother, and Katayana said, "Where are you going?" She said, "I'm going to Bodh Gaya. I haven't seen my husband for 9 years. He is there. He went there to look for food, but he hasn't been back for 9 years. He obviously hasn't found something, and we're all on the verge of death." So 9 years, his father had been searching for food and so on for his family, it seems. "What does your husband look like?" Katayana said. And the wife said, "Oh, well, you will not be able to miss him. There might be lots of other hungry ghosts around, but he really stands out. He's endowed with all 9 marks of ugliness, crooked teeth, a terrible complexion, a crooked back, an enormous butt, and so on, the 9 marks of ugliness. And he has a foul breath and so on." So it was actually Katayana who was going off to Bodh Gaya, and the hungry spirit ghost asked him to seek out her husband and tell him to return. So Katayana, when he got to Bodh Gaya, he went in search for this hungry ghost, and there were lots of hungry spirits around in this location. But one day a monk was making a water offering to spirits and so on. And as he was making the offering, an enormous gathering of spirits, including hungry spirits, gathered around him to receive the offering. And Katayana just stood there and observed. He looked at this gathering of spirits flocking around the offering, and then he found the wife's husband. Just as she described, he was more ugly. He stood out because of his ugliness. because of his terrible appearance. And so he approached him, passed on the message, and said, "I met your wife. They are on the verge of death because of starvation. Your wife is so incredibly distressed. Whatever you have," your wife says, "just come back right now because their children are on the verge. They're all on the verge of death. So just go back with whatever you have, however much or little it is." And the husband said, "I have been here looking for food for all of us day and night for 9 years, but I have not found anything." So even though there were these water offerings being made daily by this and other monks, this hungry spirit said, "I haven't even got a drop of one of these offerings because I'm very weak. It's the more powerful spirits that get the offerings." So it seems even amongst hungry spirits there are kind of some are more powerful, some are weaker, and so on. And he said one day one of the monks coughed up some phlegm and spat it out, and I managed to get a tiny bit of that, and I have this in my hand. I will take that back to my family. So I haven't eaten it for myself. I've been holding it in my hand tight for my wife and children. He'd been holding it so tight in his hand that his nails had grown into the flesh of his palm. This also shows the extraordinary power of a pure monastic, of a pure bhikshu. It said when you have a group of 4 bhikshus, fully ordained monks, that comprises the Buddhist Sangha. That means the Buddhist Sangha is present. So there's enormous benefit and merit to those vows, those full monastic vows. And such monks with pure vows, when they make prayers and do practices like water offerings and so on, and sur for the deceased, for spirits and the like, with their basis of pure discipline and endowed with bodhicitta, and then they engage in these practices, making use of the secret mantras with compassion, then they can really bring enormous benefit to those beings, multiplying offerings, blessing offerings, so that these impoverished beings can receive them and so on. So this is just one story about hungry ghosts, the suffering of hungry spirits. There's another story about a householder during Buddha Shakyamuni's time who was just so incredibly stingy. He was just unbelievably stingy. He couldn't bear to give a single penny of his wealth away. He couldn't bear to give a single bowl of food away to anyone. And in short, Buddha Shakyamuni saw that how afflicted this man was, and he sent his disciple Shariputra to go and teach him. No matter how much Shariputra taught him about the benefits of generosity, he just was not moved. Shariputra had no effect on him. Eventually, Buddha Shakyamuni taught the householder himself and managed to reduce his stinginess, teach him to be generous. The point of that, why did Buddha pay attention to this man and try and address his stinginess? Because he saw that if he continued to be so stingy, he was going to be reborn as a hungry spirit, right? So to free him from that suffering. These days, though, when these same stories are told, the same advice is given, people misunderstand it. They think, oh, the Lama's telling us not to be stingy and to make offerings to the three jewels and so on, because they want to receive offerings themselves. They just want our money. That's why they're telling us to be generous. Complete misunderstanding. The point is complete misunderstanding. The reason that the teachers say be generous, make meaningful use of your money, make offerings and so on, is to remedy our own stinginess, right? To uproot the causes for being reborn in the lower realms, to create merit for our own benefit. So back to this householder during Buddha Shakyamuni's time. So Shariputra went to teach him, to see him dozens of times, talk to him about the shortcomings of stinginess, the benefits of generosity and so on. But this man just was not moved at all. He was not impressed. One day he just said, Shariputra, you're a great man, but all you ever talk about is generosity. Do you honestly have nothing else to talk about? Is there nothing else you can tell me about? And Shariputra at this point felt, I cannot help this man. I just cannot get through to him. Moreover, I seem to just be irritating him. So Shariputra went back to Buddha Shakyamuni and said, he reported back, he said, Buddha, I'm afraid I just can't get through to this man. He just says to me, is there nothing aside from generosity that I can talk to him about? He's not interested. So then Buddha said, okay, no problem, I'll go and see him myself. Think about the kindness that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas show sentient beings, the effort they're willing to put in just for the benefit of a single sentient being, right? Rather than this householder going to see Buddha, Buddha made the effort to actually go and see him, right? Out of compassion. So Buddha made a special visit to this householder the next day and found the householder working in his fields, weeding his fields. But Buddha said, hey, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm weeding my fields. This householder apparently was super rich. And Buddha said, Will you give me then a handful of your fresh vegetables? And the householder said, yeah, of course, Buddha. And he pulled out some fresh vegetables and offered them to Buddha. And then Buddha said, so now you've made this gift to me, you've given this to me, and this is the result of this merit will ripen as this and this. On the other hand, stinginess ripens in this and that suffering, it has this and that shortcoming. And the householder was delighted by his exchange with Buddha Shakyamuni. And the next day, Buddha went to see him again, and he was drying and separating his grains, rice and so on. And the Buddha said, very nice. Could you give me a handful of your grains? And he very happily gave Buddha a handful of his grains. And then bit by bit, day by day, Buddha got through to this man so that he cast away his stinginess and became incredibly generous. He later on became a great sponsor and patron. Such is the skillful means and compassion of Buddha. This is why we praise Buddha, saying, the great Muni who is skilled in compassion and endowed with great compassion. Skilled in means and endowed with great compassion. Such are the qualities of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. So why was Buddha doing this? Why did Buddha put all this effort in to go and visit this householder day after day and encourage him to be generous? Well, to save him from the result of stinginess, to save him from the suffering of the lower realms. There was not a drop of personal interest there. There was no selfish aim there. Not like us, when we make an offering, we do it with strings attached, right? We think, oh, I'll make this offering to so-and-so and then I'll get something in return, or I'll give this gift to someone and in the future they'll pay me back or something like that. So the compassionate acts of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are not like that. They're utterly pure, solely done. They're motivated purely by the wish to benefit others, to free others from their sufferings, right? There's no strings attached. So, actually generosity, if we think about generosity, who does it really help? If you give, if you give in charity to those in need, to the homeless or the hungry, yeah, temporarily you're benefiting them, you're filling their bellies and so on. But actually, who's really benefiting? In the long term, it's you. You are benefiting. So you are helping yourself by giving. Your generosity is helping you by accumulating merit, by saving you from the lower realms, by ensuring a positive rebirth for you in the future, right? So we all need to keep that in mind. Those of you here who are wealthy, whether you be blonde-haired or black-haired or from wherever you are, whoever you are, keep this in mind. Generosity helps most of all the giver. So it's for our own sake. For our own sake that we give to accumulate. It's also for our own sake that we give to accumulate merit, to establish positive rebirth, and to progress along the progress to the state of liberation and enlightenment, right? Another detail about generosity is that we should give appropriately. So give what people actually need. Like there's a saying, when someone is hungry, give them food. And so on. So if in winter when people are suffering from cold, then it's appropriate to give, say, a heater or clothing. In the middle of summer, in the blazing heat of summer, if you give someone a heater, well, that's not very useful, is it? It's an act of generosity, but it's not very useful. So it's good to give appropriately to actually fulfill being's immediate needs with your giving. And as always, to embrace that with the threefold excellence of bodhicitta, the excellent preparation, main part, and dedication. So there's so many other stories we could tell in connection with this part of the text. As I mentioned quickly, just one of them, the story mentioned in the words of my perfect teacher. And the story from Buddha Shakyamuni's time, it is found in the sutras itself. And so those stories highlight the importance of generosity and the shortcomings of stinginess, the suffering that they will lead to. So when such hungry spirits see food, the food vanishes without trace, the rivers dry up or turn into pus and blood, and the fruit trees wilt and lose their fruit. Or if that does not happen, they are obstructed by large numbers of men, brandishing weapons and keeping guard, and so they suffer. We're on page 106 now. Now we have hungry spirits who suffer from internal obscurations. So those of external obscurations, they struggle to find any food or drink, and even if they do see some, they rush over to get it, but when they actually get there, then it dries up, it disappears, and thus they suffer. So hungry spirits with internal obscurations are described by Nagarjuna as some, their mouths like needles, eyes, their bellies huge as mountains, ache from want of food. So their mouths are absolutely tiny, their bellies are huge as mountains. They ache from hunger, and even if they do find something to eat, it won't go in their mouths, and even if it does, it then dries up. You see this in the human realm as well. Some people, because of Bekin imbalances of the Bekin element or Fem element, they become unable to eat. They just cannot swallow. They cannot take food. So they do not even have the strength to eat discarded scraps, the smallest bits of filth. So in Tibetan, there aren't spaces between the words as we have in English, so it's possible if you are not skilled in reading and in spelling, then you can easily misread, mispronounce things, and also misunderstand things. So there's this tale about how in the past someone sent a letter, this was before phones and everything, they sent a note to their spouse, friend, and they said, they wrote, they basically sent a note saying, I'm fine, I'm not sick, things are okay, but they misspelt their note, and when it reached their partner, they read it as, they also weren't skilled in reading, so they read it as, I'm sick, there's no salt, all the yaks, all the livestock have died, please make sur, burnt offering for me, which is offering for the deceased. So this just goes to show the importance of knowing how to read and write properly and knowing how to spell. So I just mispronounced this above quotation myself. So if one's not careful, one can really embarrass oneself, especially in a situation like we have here, surrounded by so many Khenpos, Lupans and so on, so many learned people. Some of you probably realize your realization is bursting forth from within. Even if they find something to eat or drink, it will not go into their mouths, though if it does, the food is dispersed inside their cheeks and the drink dries up in their poisonous mouths. Should they manage to swallow a little bit, it does not get past the throat, and any that does, it's not enough to fill the stomach. They are thus tormented by their inability to eat or drink. A bit like when you pour petrol onto a fire, the flames just blaze up even stronger, right? So some people with a wrong view, with lack of faith, will think when they hear such things, this is all nonsense, how could this even be possible? How could this be possible? After 7 or however many days without food, someone would die. It's not possible to keep living without food, without eating. But this absolutely is possible. Such karmic experiences are possible. They're possible in these other realms, in the bardo, the intermediate state, and they are also possible in the human realm. For instance, there's a tale of how in the past at Nalanda Institute in India, there was a caretaker, one of the caretakers there, and many people arrived one day to make offerings to the community. And this caretaker, so it happened that on one day, 3 or 4 different people came wanting to make offerings to the community, offerings of tea and food and so on. And the caretaker thought, well, with a kind of good motivation, wanting to look after the Sangha at Ngondro, he thought, well, rather than let them all offer on the same day, why not have them offer one day after the other? Because some days we don't have anyone making offerings at all. So he thought that, said that, and then that night when he went to sleep, and then he woke up in the middle of the night, extremely thirsty, absolutely parched, and he got up to get some water, but in the sink there was no water, in his bucket there was no water. He went outside to the trough where there was usually water, a huge trough, completely dry. Then he went to a well, he walked further away to a well. The well itself was completely dry. Then he went further out to a lake. He could not find water anywhere. And then eventually he found his way to a river, but a huge river. And I think she said he was swept away by the river. So this shows the grave karmic consequences of meddling with offerings to the Sangha. So he might have he had obstructed the offerings being made to the Sangha. He had, even though it was kind of a good idea, he had ordered, in a sense, the offerings people had made to the Sangha, and instead of giving them on the dedicated day, he'd kept them aside, thinking to give them later. So this is an example of just how careful one needs to be as a caretaker or monastery manager and so on. If you're dealing with offerings made to the Sangha at any point, you must be absolutely meticulous with them, because these are very, you could say, in karmic sense, they're very weighty offerings, and if you mistreat them or misuse them, then the karmic consequences are very grave, and can definitely ripen as rebirth as a hungry spirit. So I'm not saying this. This is taught by Buddha himself. So it's said in the Pramana text, which is quoting several lines from one of the Pramana scriptures, he with supreme valid cognition, supreme perception, pure perception, supreme valid cognition, let's say, Pramana, is Buddha Shakyamuni. So such things as we just mentioned were taught by Buddha Shakyamuni himself. So we need to pay heed. Otherwise, to praise Buddha as being the king of valid cognition and so on, but then not believe the very things that he said, well, that's foolish, right? That's pretty futile. So we should have faith. We should trust Buddha's words. We should trust the veracity, the truth of his statements. And one of the things Buddha said is that one must be very careful with offerings made to the Sangha, monastic Sangha. And the karmic consequence of misusing or mistreating those offerings in any way are very grave. Buddha Shakyamuni himself said this, so we should pay heed. So to mistreat offerings made to the Sangha, to mistreat or deceive the noble Sangha, is not just like, cheating or lying to an ordinary person. It is a grave, serious non-virtue. So that caretaker, because of his slight mistreatment of the offerings made to the Sangha, that very night in his sleep, he became a hungry spirit, or he had the experience of being a hungry spirit. Hungry spirits who suffer from obscurations related to food and drink. Any food and drink they do ingest bursts into flames, blazing away, and so on. So such is the suffering of these the hungry spirits who suffer from obscurations related to food and drink. For all these different hungry spirits there is the unbearable misery of constant hunger and thirst. Since they do not have clothes, they're burned by heat and numbed by the cold, so they experience the seasons back to front. In spring the moon burns them, in winter the sun feels cold. So they have these contradictory experiences. The clouds in summer rain down fire. They're worn out from constantly hunting for food, and as they grow weaker their joints dislocate and burst into flames. Constantly hunting for food, like the hungry spirit in the story we just told. As they are all each other's enemies, they live in fear of being bound, beaten and killed, and with no one to trust, they run away in terror. These and other severe torments have to be experienced for long periods of time. Their particular span of life can vary actually. It can be as long as an eon and also just last for the course of a day. So, in the words of the Treasury Rabbi, Dharma is taught 500 where a month is a day. They live for 500 years, one of the days being equivalent to a whole human month. So a lot of people will struggle to believe this. It just sounds unbelievable. Let it, or a friend says, for 5,000-10,000 years they will not die. So hungry spirits have to live for this long. It causes the misery of such things as stinginess and preventing others from being charitable and so on. And so to backtrack, it says that is, for some hungry spirits the lifespan is 5,000 years, while for others it is 10,000. The causes of this misery? It is stinginess, preventing others from being charitable. Just as taught in one of the Avalokiteshvara practices, under the sway of, from beginningless time, under the power of ignorance, We have been stingy, the cause of hungry ghosts. May we all be reborn in the Potala Pure Land of Manipimihong. So we chant these lines, right? As we chant these and other such lines, we need to take the meaning to heart, right? Take the actual meaning to heart, not just parrot the words and chant them nicely while playing the instruments and so on. There's no real benefit in doing that if we don't take the meaning of those words to heart. Thus, we should exercise care and concentrate on adopting what is right and avoiding what is wrong. Now we come to the reflection on the sufferings of the animals. Animals are beings that we see with our very eyes. We can see their sufferings with our own eyes. The sufferings of having to carry heavy loads, being slaughtered for their meat, used for their fur and so on. Terrible, appalling sufferings. And in these places you see people taking old livestock, old weak livestock, herding them into trucks. In terrible circumstances, all crammed together, without water, without food, and even shackling their legs together. Stapling their lips shut, shackling their legs together, and cramming them into trucks, taking them away for slaughter. Because it said if the animals are prevented from moving, then their flesh somehow stays more fresh. It is absolutely appalling just to hear about the things people do to animals and the sufferings animals have to go through. Animals that live in the depths are those in the great ocean. Since they have no dwelling to provide protection, they're carried along by the waves. Each is food for the other. The smallers are eaten by the larger ones. The larger ones are bored into and eaten by the smaller ones. They suffer unbearable distress. Then animals that live scattered in different places are those in the realms of gods and humans. Non-domesticated animals are constantly tormented by the fear of something hostile appearing, and their minds are never at ease. They live in constant fear. So wild animals. So we have drong, which I think are like a hybrid yak, similar to a yak but different. These wild animals which you must have up in Dolpo as well. They are hunted, they are preyed on by humans. So as it says, wild animals are preyed on by birds and carnivores and are helpless to resist being killed by humans. So up in Humla and the surrounding areas, we implemented a ban against hunting. So I implemented this ban, but also was supported in that by many others. And so now hunting is banned up in Humla, most areas. But still some people go out hunting, even though it's banned. Shooting drong and musk deer and the like, or killing them with stones. So this is the suffering that wild beings have to endure, this constant fear of being preyed upon. preyed upon by other animals or by humans. So like you see animals, for instance, taking water at a water hole, and some of them will drink, like antelopes, some of them will bend down to drink, and another few will stand on guard, as if on guard, looking out in all directions to see if any predators are coming. This is how they have to live. Or they're preyed upon, as I said, by humans, by hunters. Maybe one deer might be shot 3 times or 4, 5, 6 times in their flank, in their chest, in their neck, and so on, and killed. Think of the suffering they must undergo. Domestic animals suffer from having their hair pulled out. So in the past, people used to, when taking the hair from yaks, they would rip the hair out. Then later in recent years, they started cutting it with scissors, which is less painful. Their animals' noses are pierced. They are castrated, burdened with heavy loads, beaten and exploited, and killed for their meat, blood, hide, and bones. They're burdened with heavy loads, sometimes with such heavy loads that their spines actually break, their backs literally break. There's a story recently up in the mountains, an animal, a yak, who was, his owner just piled on load after load until the yak's neck snapped under the weight of the load. They're beaten and exploited, so even when weary and tired, they're whipped and made to move ever faster. They're killed for their meat, blood, hide, and bones. Like tigers and so on are killed for their hide. Or elephants are killed for their ivory, for their tusks. Moreover, their stupidity and ignorance result in their suffering. Stupidity and ignorance result in their suffering generally from bewilderment, and that they do not know what to do and what not to do. For instance, as Pacha Rinpoche says in the words of my perfect teacher, when it rains, for instance, and it's cold, animals don't have the intelligence to make a fire and gather around the fire and get warm. They don't have the intelligence to build a roof or to even search for shelter and stay out of the rain, and so on and so forth. So this just adds to their suffering. In this respect and in such things as hunger, thirst, heat, cold, and exhaustion, their misery rivals that in the hells and hungry spirit realms. So no need to explain these lines, they're very clear. For animals, there's multifold stress. They're slaughtered, tied up, beaten, and the rest. So there are a lot of wealthy people, and who knows if some of your wealth has come actually from hunting, come actually from animals suffering from hunting and killing the flesh of the hunted animals, or from slaughtering livestock, and so on. So people who do this right, they cause animals terrible suffering, whether they be wild animals or domesticated animals, and they do all of that for profit, for personal profit, so that they can then buy fancy cars, live comfortably, wear gold and jewelry and so on. So this does happen, this is happening. You hear of people slaughtering like 1,000 sheep, huge flocks of sheep or other animals, and with the profit, buying houses, buying cars. You hear this happening in Pokhara, Kathmandu and other places. For those denied the virtue that brings peace, there's agony as one devours another. As Patrul Rinpoche said, there is nothing good about non-virtue. The only good thing about it is that it can be purified through confession. It can be purified through when it's confessed with the four powers of support, regret, antidote, and commitment. Even the grave, unthinkable non-virtues like killing your father, killing your mother, and so on, these seemingly irredeemable deeds, they can be confessed and purified. But to do so, one needs the four powers, including regret and remorse, and the wish to confess. Some are killed just for their pearls or wool, their bones and blood and meat, or skins and fur, and other helpless beasts are forced to work. They're kicked or struck with hands, with whips and goads. The suffering that humans inflict on animals is just, sometimes it can't be fathomed. People butchering animals alive, and the things people do to make money from animals. It's at times humans just seem like demons. They cause others so much suffering. They seem just like demonic beings. The span of life, the span of these animals is said to be, for animals, a kalpa at the longest. That is, those with the longest lives can live up to a kalpa. Those with shorter lives do not have fixed lifespans. How should one reflect on the sufferings of the lower realms? Examine your own feelings. If you find it difficult now to stand putting your finger in the fire for just a second, or sitting naked in icy hollow in the dead of winter, or going without food and drink for a few days, or merely being stung by a bee or bitten by a flea or louse, like a dog flea. A single flea, if it gets into your bed at night, just 2 or 3, you cannot sleep the whole night. Just 2 or 3 fleas cause us that much suffering. We can't even bear that kind of suffering, right? That's how feeble our minds are, how little suffering we can bear. So think of that, and then imagine how you would endure the torments of the hells of the hungry spirit in animal realms. So think about that. Think about that, and then shun evil deeds. Shun the non-virtue that is the cause of rebirth in the lower realms. Doing so should inspire in you a feeling of fear and total disenchantment, and a strong determination to gain definite liberation, so that your precious human life is made truly meaningful. Reflecting on the sufferings of the higher realms. By accumulating positive actions consistent with ordinary merit on the paths for beings of modest, medium, or great capacity, one takes birth respectively as a human being, and so on. So by accumulating positive actions, the 10 positive actions, 10 virtues, consistent with ordinary merit, So depending on the degree to which you accumulate these positive actions, you will take rebirth as a human being, a god in the world of desire. So with lesser virtue, you'll take rebirth as a human being. With medium virtue, a god in the world of desire. And with greater virtue, a god in the higher realms. So the 10 non-virtues, the 10 virtues are the opposite of the 10 non-virtues. So for instance, the opposite of killing, taking life, is to not just avoid taking life, but to save life, to protect life. That is the first of the 10 virtues, and so on and so forth. So to shun the 10 non-virtues, just avoiding the 10 non-virtues, is described as the 10 virtues. So avoiding the 10 non-virtues is the 10 virtues. But if on top of just avoiding the 10 non-virtues, you do their opposite, so to speak, like you don't just avoid killing, but you protect others' lives, you save lives, then we can say that is you're practicing then the special 10 virtues or exalted 10 virtues. So even just the mindset, I will shun the 10 non-virtues, that itself, just that wish to avoid the 10 non-virtues is virtue. But if on top of that you perform positive actions that again, like saving lives, then you're accumulating even greater virtue. And so that makes a difference. Your motivation also makes a difference. Whether you avoid the 10 non-virtues and perform the 10 virtues with fear of the lower realms, or whether you do it with renunciation and bodhicitta, all of those things make a difference to the amount of merit, the amount of virtue accumulated. So you might think, therefore, that since there's no chance of happiness in the lower realms, you should put your efforts into trying to attain the higher realms. But just as a fire, whatever its size, cannot but burn, cyclic existence is by nature suffering, whether you take a high or low rebirth, and therefore it contains nothing worthwhile. So samsara, even rebirth in the higher realms of the humans and gods, is still full of suffering. It's still nothing but suffering. So as Buddha said, monks understand that samsara, the whole of samsara, is like a cauldron of fire. Therefore, it's important to understand that it's not only the lower realms that constitute suffering, but the higher realms as well. To do this, we reflect on the sufferings in the human, demigod, and god realm. Reflecting on the sufferings of humans. So first of all, the suffering of birth, of being born. To begin with, and until the pregnancy reaches term, we have to stay in the cramped confines of our mother's womb, scarcely tolerating the darkness, the evil smell. When we're born, it's as if we were being drawn through a wire extruder. The child being born goes through terrible suffering as it's squeezed through through its mother's opening, and the mother itself goes through incredible suffering, almost like she's on the threshold of death. When we're wiped clean, it's as if we're being flayed alive. When we're taking onto our mother's lap, we feel like a little bird being carried off by a hawk. Such are the sufferings of birth. Even when in the womb, the child, or the fetus, we can say, undergoes suffering. It is in a cramped space of the womb, dark, cramped, unclean, nauseating. And then when the child is born, then it turns around in the in the womb. It goes upside down. This very uncomfortable experience of being kind of turning upside down. And then it feels like it's being squeezed and pulled during birth, and then for the first few days, first few weeks, it's so sensitive. So sensitive. Its skin. So every touch, every minor touch or contact causes it pain and discomfort. So when it's wiped clean, when its nappy is changed, it experiences so much discomfort. It feels like it were being flayed alive. When it's picked up and put down, it feels like a little bird being carried away by a hawk. Then old age. As we age, our complexion fades and we lose our good looks and take on a dark blue ashen color. People's skin becomes grey and blue, they become crooked, their limbs bent. So the younger people might laugh at the elderly people and think, what's going on with them, you know? They're so kind of feeble and frail. But we will end up like that sooner or later. The flesh withers, the skin becomes loose. Our teeth fall out. So I've had a few teeth out myself, but then new teeth put in. Otherwise, if you have teeth out and no new teeth put in, then your mouth kind of collapses in. The shape of your face changes. As we become physically weaker, we find it difficult to get up. We stagger as we walk. When we speak, we cannot articulate, you cannot pronounce clearly, you cannot see clearly. You become hard of hearing. So my hearing's still okay, but it's not as good as it used to be. Your food loses its flavor. No matter what you eat, you just say, oh, it doesn't taste of anything. It doesn't taste of anything because your tongue itself has degenerated. And if you eat a lot of food or a lot of rich food, then your body can't take it, you get diarrhea. If you don't eat enough, you feel hungry. So a little less food leaves us hungry, while a little more gives us indigestion. So there are probably some elderly people here. It's that the doctors say that elderly people should eat similar food to young children. So small amounts, often, so maybe 4, 5, 6 times a day. Just small amounts, but eaten frequently. Because then the stomach has a chance of digesting these small amounts of food. So those of you who are looking after your parents or the elderly, you should keep this in mind. This is how to take good care of them. So usually it's the daughters or women who are much more caring, much better at taking care of people. They just pay more attention, take much more care. So what kind of food should you give to the elderly? Well, just as I explained, that's what the doctors themselves say. Small amounts, small portions given frequently. That is what is good for the elderly. When we're sick, we suffer infinite pain and distress resulting from imbalances of the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind due to our previous deeds and present circumstances. So the details of all of this, we need to look at the medical texts, how the different types of illnesses, physical suffering, illnesses arise from the specific imbalances in the elements, the wind element and the phlegm element, the bile element, and so on. Aching and physically weakened by illness, we're no longer free to enjoy things we like, such as food and drink or sleep. So maybe you are awake all night, you struggle to sleep. We're obliged to resort to unpleasant medicines, treatments, regimens, and so forth, and wonder apprehensively whether we're going to die. Chemotherapy, maybe you have to have chemotherapy, which makes you weak, makes your hair fall out. Chemotherapy, basically, and radiotherapy, immunotherapy, these treatments. These days they also have this radiotherapy treatment. But chemotherapy has a lot of side effects, right? It makes your hair fall out, causes you a lot of other side effects, nausea and problems with your teeth and with your eyesight and so on. So such are the sufferings we undergo when sick. Then we have death, the suffering of death. At the time of death, nothing, neither medicines, treatments, nor special rituals can help, and we'll have no choice but to leave behind all the wealth, fame, power, following, and friends we've worked so hard to obtain, and even the body we've cherished so much. The suffering of death. We talk about the specific suffering of death, experienced at the moment of death, on your deathbed. When all of the actions the negative karmas and negative things you've done in your life come back to haunt you. So as our vital life force is severed, we will go through through intense suffering and die. So we make prayers to be reborn in the pure realms and to avoid intense suffering at the time of death, right? I make these prayers myself. May I not suffer terribly at death. May I be reborn in the pure realms. I recite this prayer all the time. I think Rinpoche said it's prayer by Mukun Rinpoche, but you find similar lines in many prayers. I make this prayer myself all the time, and you too should make this prayer. May we not experience intense suffering at the time of death. May we die smoothly and be reborn in the pure realms. May we also not be... It's also terrible suffering if you are if you linger for a long time. You become really infirm and you are left in bed, unable to rise to go to the toilet and having to be nursed around the clock and so on. That's also a terrible suffering, right? Dying really slowly like that. So these four great rivers of suffering, of birth, old age, sickness and death, are common to all human beings. All human beings, no matter where you are in the world, east, west, here, the US. But they are not the only ones we have to experience. For instance, you hear stories about migrants going to the USA, hoping for a better life, and the suffering they go through when traveling there, giving their entire life's wealth to people for a place on a boat or what have you, to be trafficked into the US. And then often they're robbed or assaulted or worse. So we also have the suffering. So not only do we experience those four great rivers of suffering, there are also specific sufferings that occur interspersed between these four, such as the suffering of not getting what we want. The experience of some migrants going to the USA would be just one example of this. the suffering of misfortune befalling us, things we do not want, such as hunger and thirst, heat and cold, involvement in disputes and lawsuits, being the subjects of rumors. So, conflict or disharmony with our friends, our spouse, our family, being wrongly accused, being the subject of rumors, being punished by authorities, fined and imprisoned, and so on. All of these types of misfortune can befall us. Like in all these corrupt politicians and leaders who are now being caught out and will soon be sent to prison. So a lot of the really powerful political leaders in Nepal, India, Taiwan, and elsewhere end up in prison. The suffering of separation from beloved relatives and what is pleasant, happiness and comfort, wealth, entourage, companions, relatives and friends, and the like. So back for a minute to the politics. So Rishi said a few specific things about politics in Nepal. If one is a practitioner, meaning a monastic or renunciate, as opposed to a layperson, then one should avoid politics at all costs. Look at the example of Buddha Shakyamuni, our teacher. He left his palace, his kingdom, we could say his city of gold, and discarded all of those worldly activities, and devoted himself purely to the spiritual path, right? So the Dharma and the mundane world should be clearly delineated. They should not be mixed together. If you are a practitioner, Dharma practitioner, if you're someone who's supposedly devoted themselves to the Dharma, then you should not engage in politics. Politics is a worldly, mundane activity. So don't mix the two. And we also have the suffering of encountering hated enemies and what is unpleasant, such as sickness, negative forces, and so on. There's really nothing good about politics. Politics is just dishonesty, cunning, deceit. Not much more than that. In short, both rich and poor suffer greatly. For the rich, the greater their wealth and circle of attendants, the more they must suffer protecting it all. For the poor, there's the misery of deprivation, for they never manage to acquire the food, clothes, and other things they need, however much they look for them. The worst suffering is this misery of deprivation. Having an empty stomach. This is a real suffering. That is real suffering. So if you can be free of that suffering, have a full belly not just with like the really lousy food, but some kind of okay food. food that is healthy and tasty enough, and if you have enough clothes to keep you warm and a roof over your head, honestly speaking, what more than that do you need? So one time I went with my brother Sangye Rinpoche to the Sheraton Hotel, this 5-star hotel. We went to this 5-star hotel and had this fancy meal. But then a few days later we went to a momo restaurant, just ate momos at Boda in this really simple restaurant. And honestly speaking, the momos were 3 or 4 times more delicious. There's really nothing special about this fancy food you get in 5-star hotels. I guess people are paying for the environment, for the fancy seat and table and fancy environment, but it really doesn't make a difference. It doesn't really make a difference. So those who are wealthy, they have this constant fear and anxiety about their wealth. It might be they're worried they're going to be arrested, or other people are going to come after their wealth. And those who are poor also have suffering, the suffering of not having what they need. So lay people must work, right? You have no choice to work in order to provide for yourself, provide for your spouse, your children, your parents, and so on. That's your responsibility. You must work, and work hard, conscientiously to do that. But don't get too caught up in excessive wants and desires. Work so that you and your family have what you need, but no need to overdo it and get so caught up and admired in greed and desire and attachment. So in the series of lives, the series of Buddha's past lives, it said the first is afflicted by guarding it, the rich are afflicted by guarding it, the second, the poor are exhausted looking for it, for wealth. Whether rich or poor, nowhere will there be any joy. So this is really how it is. Again, it would be nice to tell some stories here, some stories to bring these points home, but we don't have time for that today, since it's Kyabje Rinpoche's Parinirvana. At best there's mental anguish, in most cases it's physical. By both these forms of suffering is the whole world daily crushed. Likewise, Mipo Rinpoche said in one of his treatises, he said basically worse than the physical suffering is mental suffering. Worse than the suffering of having an empty belly is the suffering of being ignored. So meaning actually mental suffering is even worse than physical suffering. It is more overwhelming. Mental suffering even drives people to take their own lives, right? But by both these forms of suffering, physical and mental both, the whole world is daily crushed. This is from Aryadeva's The 400 Stanzas on the Middle Way, an incredibly precious text. These quotations merely illustrate what we can all too plainly see for ourselves. Reflecting on the suffering of the demigods, in general, the jealousy the demigods experience when they see the splendor, abundance, and so on of everything in the gods' realm causes them constant anguish. There is a wish-fulfilling tree that is rooted in the realm of the demigod. Its roots and trunk are in the realm of the demigod, but its branches and fruits grow in the realm of the gods above. So the demigods see all of these riches, the riches coming from this tree, ripening and being available in the god realm, and they're overcome by jealousy and envy. And so they wage war on the gods out of jealousy. But then the gods are more powerful, so the demigods always lose. And the gods, if they get wounded or cut or one of their limbs severed or something, immediately their wounds heal, their limbs grow back. But the demigods are not like that. If they are wounded seriously, then they die. So you can look at the war waging between Russia and Ukraine, in Israel and so on. The cause is exactly the same, right? Jealousy, envy, aggression. And we see these very sufferings playing out in our own world. In the past, we had similarly, we had a lot of war and conflict in Nepal and up in the mountains, Humla and surrounding areas with Maoist insurgency and so on. And for years, we were living kind of on the edge of our seats, not knowing what was going to happen. And when you get really anxious and anyway, some people get so anxious they become depressed, or in Tibetan we say soklong, you could say like it's depression or anxiety. And when someone becomes depressed, then your mind isn't stable, right? You can end up saying and thinking all sorts of funny things. The mind is no longer stable. Like recently, someone came to see. In the past, someone came to see me and said, "Oh, I'm so unhappy. My son isn't behaving well, and I have problems with my wife." Da 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 da. And I thought, "Oh, poor guy. Probably what he says is true. He's really in this situation." And then I said, "I'll give you a blessing." So he was weeping about his family situation, and then I said, "I'll give you a blessing," and then he just started weeping at that. And then I thought, "All right, this man is he's depressed. He's a bit mentally unwell here." So one can take medicine for these things, different types of Tibetan medicine, which can help correct this imbalance in the body. It's according to Tibetan medicine, these sorts of problems are a result of the imbalance in the wind element, and this can be cured with medicine. So it's said that 30% of the US population suffer from depression. Is that not terrifying? So if you suffer from depression, then it's important to recognize it, right? Depression and these sorts of things. It's important to recognize it and to get treatment, medical treatment. And the best treatment is the Dharma. The best treatment is the nectar of the Dharma. If you really take the Dhamma to heart, it can cure you of all of your mental illnesses. There's this famous teacher, Osho, right? In around 2015. So it's predicted that in the 21st century, the greatest human disease afflicting humans will be depression, and the best medicine for that is the Buddha Dhamma. So this, I listened to a recording of this famous Osho and heard him say this. And so this Osho is very famous and a very smooth talker, but he's kind of like Sharavralchi, a very smooth talker, but with no real substance behind it. I met someone in Australia who'd spent many years with Osho and told me a lot of things which showed that, he was a good talker, but he really, there was no real substance to it. Like he didn't live in accord with, he didn't practice what he preached. He failed to practice what he preached, and this problem is something that afflicts a lot of people, right? A lot of, as well, Khenpos and Lopans and teachers of the Dharma. So now we'll dedicate the merit and take a break.